I'm very happy to announce that we will be talking about European crypto regulation and policy developments. A very hot topic, lots of uncertainty, gray areas, and just in general, a topic that people are very interested in. And I'm happy to announce that today we have Marina Markezic. I hope that's the right way of pronouncing your surname. She's the Executive Director of the European Crypto Initiative. And you guys can see there what their Twitter handle is and the website. So, Marina, first of all, hello and welcome. It's awesome to have you here, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invite. I'm really looking forward to this debate.
Awesome. Yeah, as you can see, so Marina, as you know, DAO Club is really like a social club where we meet on a weekly basis, where DAOs from all over the world, DAO builders and DAO entrepreneurs, founders, we come together and we talk about topical issues and solve problems together and just hang out in general. So today's topic is very, very special, and we needed to bring in some expert knowledge like yourself, because there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's impossible sort of to find a lot of the information that we're looking for on the internet. So it's great to have you here. Okay, so just talking about the agenda. Very quickly, we're going to have an update from Marina on the EU crypto regulation policy developments. Okay, and then we're going to open it up for some Q&A. Okay, so I think, Marina, you're going to be busy for around 20 minutes, and then the rest of the time we'll spend on Q&A. So hopefully you've all got your questions ready. Just very briefly, we are recording this session today, so please smile, keep yourself on mute whilst you're not talking. And then when we get to the Q&A session, please take yourselves off mute. I'll give you a chance to ask your question directly to Marina instead of just dropping it in the chat. This is your opportunity to speak to her directly. Okay, so with that said, Marina, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then I'll hand over to you. Is that okay?
Hi, thank you so much. So I hope I will know how to share my screen here. I'm not sure I've done it before, but no.
Okay. At the bottom there's a little rocket ship, and just to the right of the rocket ship.
Okay. Starting with the... Yes. Okay, perfect. So let me just find it. Just a minute. Sorry for that. But yeah, this is my presentation for today. So basically, I'll tell you a little bit more about EUCI, what is EUCI, how we started with EUCI, and what are our activities. I will not be too long because I know that you have a lot of questions. And as you said, this is a very, very important topic at the moment. It's very much debated. Unfortunately, I'm not a US lawyer and I'm not working within the US jurisdiction, so I can only speak on what is happening in the EU, but I'll try to give my best answers also to general questions that you might have later. So the European Crypto Initiative is a non-profit organization based in Brussels. We are an advocacy group that works with regulators, try to explain all the blockchain crypto topics to them and engage as much as possible on different levels. So we do talk to regulators like as the European Commission, the European Parliament, and also the Council. But also we are trying to engage with regulators on the member state level. So speaking to ministries for different member states, because in different parts of the process, of the legislative process, they have different, I would say, power, or at least they're engaged in a different way. The EUCI was really founded by 3 lawyers. We are in the space for quite a long time. Florian founded an organization based in Germany. He was working in crypto from 2014. Simon actually founded Ethereum funds and also worked with regulators there. My name is Marina, and I'm coming from Slovenia, so I was mostly working with regulators in Slovenia. And when we saw the first MiCA draft being published, this is where we also started engaging with the EU on the EU policy level, because we have understood that from the beginning, this is also something that I think was not really planned or was not something that was happening in the beginning. Until 2020, all the regulation was happening on the member state level. And since MiCA started and was published in 2020, this is when most of the regulations were really discussed on the EU level. So maybe let's go back to what we will discuss today. I'll share a little bit of what we do, but then also I would like to make just a short regulatory overview, and this might already answer some of the questions you have. And for the others, I'm happy to take most of the time today for answering your questions. So what do we do and why we exist, what we advocate for, and who we speak to? This is all the things that I'm going to be covering today. The scope of our work is really to try to understand what's happening in Brussels, and if we detect a regulation or a directive that might have an impact on crypto or on blockchain in general, we do respond to that. We do actively seek engagement with the regulators, and then we write position papers, have meetings with them, and try to influence and educate in a way that it would not limit innovation. So what we have done until now, we exist almost 3 years now. We have engaged in the MiCA regulation. We have engaged in the AML regulation. There is a whole package on the anti-money laundering side, where the EU is quite intensively working on that. We have 4 different documents that we are engaging in the process with, and it's going to be quite important for the whole, say, DAO, crypto, with blockchain ecosystem in general. And we have recently also been quite active on the Data Act, which is an act that regulates sharing of data, but it also mentions smart contracts. So this is why it's quite important. And just for the end, I'll mention a little bit the digital euro and CBDCs. Might not be that important for DAOs, I would say, but it is quite important for the crypto ecosystem in general. Very briefly, I think it's quite important to know how the EU legislative process works in order to know also how to respond and what it means. When we tweet about news, or there is something that is written in the blog or other media, I think it can be quite confusing understanding where we are in the process currently on different drafts that are important for everyone here. So I know that many times when we mention, oh, the parliament is voting on this and this and this, there are many votes in the whole process where the parliament is involved. And many times I know that the community thinks that this is the last vote and this is going to be the final draft, but many times it's not the case. So I'll just do a very, very short presentation on how the whole process works. So in general, the markets in crypto assets regulation was started and was done in a way where all 3 institutions, the European Parliament, the European Council, and the European Commission, they write their own drafts. So whenever we hear something on Twitter, oh, the Parliament has issued their own draft of this specific regulation, that doesn't mean that this is the final one. It's just one of the 3 drafts that we have almost at the end of the process. And within this process, then the trialogue starts, where all these 3 institutions discuss together and then decide which part of which draft is going to be in the final draft of MiCA, for example, in this case. So that's why we also try to communicate as clearly as possible on Twitter and other social media. But I think this is something that is quite important. So why the markets in crypto assets regulation is important for DAOs? Because it, in a way, it is a regulation that means that it's going to be identical in all the member states. There's no need to basically translate this regulation or implement it in the specific member state. It will be applicable the same day in all the member states. It is important because it's harmonizing the EU market on crypto assets. And of course, the idea is to ensure more legal certainty and clarity. What is mostly important for MiCA, and I would say that this is the major difference between the US. If you remember something today, I think this is the thing that you have to remember, is that MiCA and the EU, the whole process, and everyone involved in the process, they decided to define a completely new asset group, which is called a crypto assets. So the EU thinks that crypto assets, most of them at least, are not securities, are not commodities, are not something else that existed before, but they are a completely new group of assets, and they are called crypto assets. They are regulated. They are not regulated as strictly as securities or financial instruments, as we call them in the EU. But I think this is a very good news. That means that exchanges can still list tokens. That means that most of the tokens that we know today, if they are utility tokens, they will not be securities, and they can still function in a way that we function as a crypto industry today. And I'm saying this because I know that most of the DAOs, or a lot of DAOs, are also engaging with crypto assets, and some of them might also issue some of the crypto assets. So this is pretty important. The other very important thing is, when is this regulation going to be applicable? So when is the date when everyone that would like to access the European market would need to be compliant with this regulation? And this date is changing. Every month we hear news about it, but most likely it will be in summer 2024. The part that regulates stablecoins is going to be applicable then, and all the other part of MiCA is going to be applicable in 2024, by the end of 2024. So this is the time when everyone that would like to access the European market would need to be compliant with it. I know that many times a lot of projects say, oh, if you don't like this regulation, you can just go and choose your own jurisdiction and move your incorporation somewhere else. It might be true partially, but this regulation really regulates the market. So anyone that wants to access any consumers in the EU would need to be compliant with this regulation. So what is important with the regulation is that the scope within which crypto asset service providers mostly are regulated. So we heard a lot about exchanges, FTX, etc. Crypto asset service providers are the ones that are centralized, and they are, for example, custodians, exchanges, etc. They need to obtain a license, and they need to also incorporate in the EU. I would say that that might be partially interesting for DAOs, but not entirely. The other thing that is important is that it regulates the issuance of crypto assets, which means that whoever wants to issue any type of tokens will need to follow the rules. And the rules are that you need to write a white paper and notify the national competent authority while you are issuing this crypto asset. Another thing very important is that stablecoins are heavily regulated, but again, they are not securities. So they are crypto assets. We can see here, there are different types of crypto assets. There is an umbrella term, a very general one, and there are different types as stablecoins. We have two types of stablecoins. One group is called electronic money token, the other is called asset reference tokens. So the electronic money token is most of the stablecoins we know today, because they are referencing a value of one fiat currency. The asset reference tokens are different, and they can reference a combination of different currencies, of different assets, or any type that is not an electronic money token will be an asset reference token. Then we have the utility tokens that are mostly the ones that, in a way, DAOs interact with, and also the non-fungible tokens. The non-fungible tokens were not regulated or were not mentioned in the first draft, but over the years they have been defined in a way where if a token is a non-fungible token, it's excluded from the regulation, so it's not regulated. The problem is that a non-fungible token is a legal definition, and it's not something that we are used to in the ecosystem when we refer to non-fungible tokens, to tokens that are using specific standards. In this case, the substance is more important. And so if the NFTs, even if using specific standards, are issued in big batches, or there's a lot of them that have similar prices, the regulator in Europe tends to think that it's they can be very similar to basically tokens, to general tokens, so to the fungible tokens, and that then might be included in the regulation, which means that they will need to follow the same rules. If you issue those tokens, again, need to write a white paper and notify the competent authority. Just a few minutes on stablecoins. So stablecoins are, as I mentioned, regulated. One of the very important part in MiCA says that there is a cap on how much stablecoins can be used or used in the EU when it comes to payments. We have a cap of 200 million transactions per day in the EU when stablecoins are used as payment. And this is only true for stablecoins that are denominated in non-EU currencies. So basically most of the stablecoins, again, that we use today that are linked to the value of the US dollar. I mentioned this before, MiCA will be applicable in 2024. What it is important is that now the work has not stopped for us. The MiCA draft is going to be finalized next week on the 18th. There's going to be a vote in the European Parliament. So this is really going to be the final one. But there is a lot of work with the European Securities Agency and the European Banking Authority, because they need to issue a lot of guidance. They need to work on the secondary or technical process, as we call it, before MiCA will be applicable in 2024. You have probably heard months ago about MiCA 2. So what is MiCA 2? Is it really coming? Is it important? Do you need to know about it? Nobody says that MiCA 2 is coming, but we do have one part in MiCA that says, is it the so-called revision clause? And the revision clause said then in 18 months, the European Commission needs to check specific parts of MiCA and see if there would need to be additional regulation added or something changed within MiCA according to how it is implemented in different member states and according to the comments that maybe different projects or crypto as a service providers will give to the MiCA text. So in this case, we are expecting that the European Commission, probably in 2 years, will issue a report and some regulatory suggestions on how to regulate DeFi. What is really important right now is that DeFi is not regulated in MiCA. The decentralized use cases are not regulated in MiCA. There is one part specifically that says if there's only partial decentralization of a specific project, it doesn't mean that it is excluded from MiCA. It needs to be fully decentralized to be excluded, so it shouldn't be any type of crypto as a service provider. It is very hard to know what is full decentralization and what is partial decentralization. We don't have any guidance on this. None of the regulators, none of the agencies have issued any reports or opinions on this, so it's really, really hard to know. But this is what we know in Europe at the moment. And I think that this is quite important for DAOs. It is important for everyone that thinks they are a technical provider and not a service provider. And I think that this is the discussion that we still need to have in Europe. And it's something that we'll definitely are working on continuously. But we're also working on a proposal for a potential DeFi regulation, or at least some principles on how DeFi should be regulated in the next years. Besides MiCA, what is also important for DAOs, it's the AML package, the anti-money laundering package. We have 4 different documents here. One is the transfer of funds regulation, which is basically already finalized, and it will be applicable in the same date as MiCA. The transfer of funds regulation is the travel rule. I think this is the wording that you're using in the US for the ones that are coming from the US. And it's basically writing the rules on what kind of information needs to be information that is following a crypto transaction. So whenever some crypto asset service providers are transacting with crypto assets between them, they need to exchange specific information. And it's usually the KYC information that we're used to. The other 3 documents are still in progress, and we're still negotiating and working with regulators on those 3 documents. Is the anti-money laundering regulation, the anti-money laundering directive, and also the anti-money laundering regulation for a new agency that is going to be an agency that is going to be the first time we'll have a European agency overlooking certain parts within the European AML regulation for the whole EU. So that's pretty important. I think this Commission's main mandate, which is ending the next year, this is one of the most important projects within the Commission. Speaking of the Commission, the European Commission is usually the one that suggests drafts for new laws, for new regulations and directives. And we know that their mandate is ending next year. So in a year, we'll have new elections, we'll have a new Commission, we'll have some new plans coming up. And after those, we'll know more on what's going to happen in Europe for the next, I would say, 4 years. We'll know more about the potential DeFi regulation. We'll know more about their ideas on how to regulate potentially DAOs, etc. But for now, whatever they were planning, they're slowly ending with this executional part of the whole legislative process, and we'll learn more about in the next years. Very quickly, I want to mention the digital euro. When the European Commission talks about the strategy for digitalized finance, they usually speak about MiCA, regulating crypto assets, but at the same time, they speak about the digital euro and saying we will have the cash that we use in Europe digitalized. And this is a part of how we see our digital future and digital finance in the EU. There's a lot of questions regarding the digital euro. We know that it will happen. It's in the progress. The European Commission and the European Bank are working on it. What we're mostly concerned about is the privacy aspect and also the interoperability with the crypto assets ecosystem, so with the crypto ecosystem. But it's something that is happening right now. There's a lot of debate around it. And if you're interested in it, we'll definitely tweet in the next weeks and in the next months about it. It's going to be a very long-term project, and I would say it's one of the most ambitious projects that the European Union has at the moment. I would stop here for now. I think we still have some time for your questions, but I would just summing up from what you have heard today. There are no specific regulations that are specifically addressing DAOs. I think that DAOs have many different, DAOs are so diverse and so different. They have different activities. They also use different ways of funding, different ways of communicating, functioning. I think what is usually happening in the jurisdictions around the world, but also globally, we see that financial regulation is becoming the first regulation that is being the one regulating crypto assets. So everything has been looked from this, I would say, financial point of view. And wherever there is a DAO that is using the financial, I would say, services or offering financial services or any type of technology linked to that, that might be quite important for those DAOs. But DAOs that are having different activities and they are not engaging in any sort of financial activities, those might be, I would say, less regulated and less targeted in the next weeks or years. But that's just a very, very general comment. And I'll just stop here and give you time for questions.
Okay, awesome. Well, Marina, thank you very, very much for giving us that update. Obviously, a lot happening in terms of policy development. I wasn't even aware of MiCA, so it's really interesting to see this is being developed. I feel like this is a step in the right direction, because compared to the US, who sort of thinks the one day that Ethereum is a security and then the next day it's a commodity, and there's such conflicting information, it feels like MiCA defining the crypto asset as its own class is a step in the right direction. Would you agree that that's sort of a good thing for us in Europe?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say that we're in a point of time where no regulation on crypto or blockchain, it's not possible anymore. And it's just deciding how to regulate those assets and how to regulate, in a way, activities, not so much the technology around it, but really the activities. The European Commission started very early. They started already in 2018, 2019. MiCA is really the response to Libra or Diem. Some of you might remember, but it was a really long time ago, a project that never took off. But this is the result we have today, and it has been discussed for many years. This is how we do things in Europe. It takes a lot of time. But then also we plan for the future, which means that this is most likely not going to change so quickly, which means that we have some predictability in the EU. And this happened much earlier than all the SEC activities, I would say, especially in the last few months. So when a lot of people were asking, so how does FTX crisis in a way influence Europe and European thinking on how to regulate crypto assets? Most of the work has already been done by then. So the political process has already been, I would say, finalized, and there was a political agreement on how to regulate crypto assets. So it was legally not really possible to change it. Although, of course, there were many questions and many comments on we need to regulate it even stricter than we predicted at the beginning. Can we find a way on how to make MiCA applicable even before 2024? They couldn't. So this is what we have right now in Europe.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, I won't hog the microphone. I'm now going to hand over to everyone else that we have here today. It obviously seems like there is some ambiguity and gray areas around DAOs still, but the fact that everyone here is building a DAO, Marina, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I'm going to give you some very tough questions from our audience, whether you have the answers or not. Let's see how far we get. Okay, so yeah, first of all, I know Jeremy had a question. So Jeremy, can you take yourself off mute and we'll start with you. And then anyone else who's got a question, just drop an emoji in the chat so that I know you've got a question, and then I'll bring you up when Jeremy is finished. Don't drop your question in there, just an emoji. So first of all, Jeremy, you're on the stage.
Yes, hi. Thanks, Marina.
Hello.
Yeah, I wanted to know what would be triggering an obligation for a DAO to have an legal entity tied to it.
Yeah, so this is a very, very hard question. I would say it depends on many things, but I think it mostly depends on the activity. The regulators lately, they are trying to focus on the activity of certain organizations, communities, DAOs, etc., and not so much on the tech, which means that if there is an activity that is seen as services provided and regulated within a crypto asset service provider's regulation under MiCA, will mean that they will need to be incorporated in the EU and also following all the rules there. There's some requirements for licensing, which means that they would need to talk to the national competent authorities in in one member state that they choose. So how MiCA will work is that after talking to a specific national competent authority, you will then be able to passport this regulation and your operations in the whole EU. So it doesn't need to be the case that is happening right now, going and speaking to every national competent authority, but you just do it in one country. For example, you do it in France, and then after getting your license, you will be able to offer services on the whole EU. The other thing that I think it's quite important is the part in MiCA that talks about decentralization. So decentralized entities are not included in MiCA, so they're not subject to MiCA. And then what is decentralization? I don't have an answer, but I know that, for example, also the Financial Action Task Force, like FATF, has issued a lot of recommendations on understanding what is a crypto as a service provider or a virtual asset service provider. And they have specifically issued reports that states what is something that would be seen as a virtual as a service provider. So how does it look like? What kind of control specific, I would say, entity or specific group of people or one person has over this organization to be seen as a virtual asset service provider? And I would say that mostly this is the important part.
Okay. Thanks, Marina. I hope that answers your question, Jeremy. Okay, so just before I go, I can see Sino, Page, you guys have got some questions. I did get some questions from members before we even met. So Sean, I know you've got a question. Sean, are you there?
I am. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. We can hear it.
Hello. Yeah. So I did have a question. I was wondering how you see Open Collective and some of the infrastructure around nonprofits evolving towards like DAO frameworks that are more on-chain. Like, because right now we're trying to choose between going on Open Collective to raise funds and trying to move funds into like on-chain treasury, and wondering how to balance those two things.
Yeah, that was a very interesting question. So I think that Open Collective and similar projects, they're doing a tremendous work into sharing the knowledge on if, again, a DAO wants to incorporate, how to incorporate in a specific way. There's also cooperatives, nonprofits. There's even the possibility of having a European cooperative organization in the EU. Whenever we're talking about on-chain governance or on-chain treasury, I think there's a lot of questions that needs to be answered, not even from the point of view of, for example, incorporation, but also later on anti-money laundering. So first, what are the rules that we have today in specific countries where we want to look into the rules on incorporation? And then how to combine those with the rules that we have today on anti-money laundering, especially the ones that are dedicated to crypto assets. So some countries in the EU, they have those rules already written and the laws are already, I would say, applicable, but most of the countries, they're also waiting for the anti-money laundering rules that are going to be finalized in this year in the EU and then applicable in few years. So it might be quite, I would say, challenging. I know that the BBLC does an amazing job on also looking into and taking into account the on-chain governance and some of the, I would say, smart contracts and on-chain activity for DAOs, but we don't have a similar rule in the EU. We don't have a similar, I would say, law that would be specifically addressed to some DAOs that would like to incorporate. I just want to mention that we're also part of and collaborating with the COALA. COALA has been writing, it's an organization that wrote the COALA model law and has been now used in some of the states in the US as something that might become a law very soon for DAOs. And I think that their point of view is very interesting because the idea is to get a limited liability in a DAO specific way. So if you do comply with some of the requirements of the model law, you would get a limited liability, which is not the same as the limited liability that you would get under LLC. And I would say the rules that you need to follow are very DAO specific and are very much designed for the way how DAOs function. So I think that this is a pretty great, great tool that we can use in the future. And if we can lobby and advocate for similar rules also in the EU, I think that would be one of the really good ways how to move forward.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your question, Sean. Appreciate that. MiCA, if you're there, MiCA, I know you had a question around flexible jurisdictions. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
I was at the time I heard that Estonia is now having quite an easy way to open up a company that's legalizing DAO, but that's all I heard. Well, do you have more information about that maybe?
I'm not aware of Estonia having any type of laws that would address DAOs specifically. So to my knowledge, we do not have in Europe any country, no country at the moment has a DAO specific law. But if you have more information, I would be happy to learn about it. The problem, I would say, in the EU is also going to be that every member state is responsible for their own laws on incorporation of different entities. And in terms of, for example, our work, we would need to work with every member state separately in order for, of course, work with them on a potential DAO model law. So
Okay,
no, I don't have any type of information, but I know that different existing legal entities are used for DAOs and they're incorporating in different member states. For example, there are some DAOs incorporated in France, there are some incorporated in the Netherlands, some are using similar as we and you mostly know from Switzerland, which is not a part of the European Union, which I would say, at least to this date, is one of the most DAO-like and flexible jurisdictions, like associations, foundations, etc. There are similar types in different member states, and they have been used by different DAOs.
Thank you. You are from Slovenia, right?
Yes.
Are there any? What would you do, like as a Slovenian citizen? Like, if you wanted to open up a DAO, what kind of company type or?
I think the most similar to DAOs would be cooperatives. I think in Europe we have an amazing cooperative system, and I think that those could be quite similar to the I would say to the spirit of the DAO.
Because MiCA, you're in Slovenia as well, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, great.
Okay. Okay.
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Sino, are you? Where is Sino? Is he here?
I'm here.
Yes.
Hi, Marina.
Okay, Hi.
Yeah. Hey. Yes. I have a question. What would you recommend for projects that are already ongoing, that are not regulated, that will be subjected by MiCA? What is your advice in order for the day that they implement those regulations, that people are not completely lost? Like, what would be the advice for people starting projects, or perhaps ongoing projects in Europe that will be subjected by it? Is there any recommendation you would have? Because there's not enough, I would say, lawyers right now in the market that actually have experience in this. So how can people be helped in order to have the required processes in order to be regulated by MiCA in their local jurisdiction?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think this is an amazing question, and of course, I am a lawyer, but I'm not giving legal advice here. I'm really speaking as on a capacity of someone that is trying to shape the laws in a way that it will still, I would say, follow the ideas of blockchain and crypto ecosystem, and especially the decentralized values. I would say that in practice, what I'm seeing is that different projects react in a very different way. Some of them would like to be compliant as soon as possible, so they are already starting with the compliance processes. They are already obtaining licenses from some of the member states, and there would be a way, and how we call it, a grandfathering clause. So basically, the ones that are regulated in and having a license already in some of the jurisdictions that have crypto laws, like Germany or France, they will also be quickly turned into licenses that will be licenses under MiCA, just because they are also very similar to what they have at the moment. But this is really only for the crypto as a service providers. We have a list of crypto as a service providers under MiCA, and those that offer those services, they will need to have a license. At the same time, for most of the projects that are not crypto as a service providers, I think that some of them, really depending on the activity and on what they do, they might be quite aware of the AML laws. Again, I think that the anti-money laundering laws might be even stricter and more problematic than the markets in crypto assets laws, because if the project has already issued a token and they do not need to issue new tokens, they will not need to write white papers and issue white papers, because MiCA is not going to be I would say applicable for the issuance that happened in the past, only for the future ones. And I think that we need to be very mindful, and we have been discussing with the EU regulators about this. This compliance is going to be very burdensome, and it's also very costly. I know that blockchain has allowed us to be very flexible and to build an incredible ecosystem and to build incredible infrastructures. But with the regulation that is coming up, I would say that at least part of it will be limited or will need to be taught upfront on how to engage with, how to build, which kind of users and which kind of projects we will need to connect with. So I would say that as much as it is hard, we will need to learn what are the best or the most important things that we will need to follow after MiCA is going to be in a way applicable, and the transfer funds regulation too, in order to function. So I would say, again, it really depends on the activity of the project. But I think that we also need to be like very, again, objective in saying that most of the very small projects, if they do not have very, I would say, financial-like activities, they might not be as heavily regulated as the ones that have financial activities. But at the same time, again, everyone will need to be much more aware of the laws compared to what we have done in the past.
Thank you, Marina.
Etienne, you're muted.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Bruno. Paige from Frontier DAO. Paige, are you there?
Hello.
Hi, Paige.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Marina.
Hi, hello.
Hey, thank you for that comprehensive. That's a lot of information. I'm going to have to process that over the next week or so. It's great. You know, my question is more. You've addressed it on a couple of your answers already, but my question is kind of more in terms of trying to figure out jurisdiction. You know, because of the decentralized nature of DAOs. Yeah, so it's like, you know, say if when you're if your intention is to issue a token, so this question is really more relative to token issuance, but and you're like, so the DAO is actually established, like the actual smart contract frameworks is held in by a platform in Switzerland. But then most of the members are in Europe with a growing membership in North America. But then the legal structure is, you know, currently in the United States, but can be transferred to, say, for example, you know, Bahamas or Cayman Islands or Panama. Where would the jurisdiction fall then? I mean, in terms of like these MiCA regulations that you've been introducing us to.
Yes, so MiCA is important anytime there is an offering of those crypto assets to the EU citizens. So whenever you would like any EU citizen to buy your token, that it would be an offering. There are still specific rules that are not prohibited, as we call them reverse solicitation. So whenever somebody, for example, is issuing their tokens and there would be somebody from the EU learning about it, not through their marketing, but just, I don't know, maybe through somebody else talking about it or their friends telling them that this is happening, and they would come to their website and use those services, not in a way that would be connected to the marketing of this specific company, or specifically if this, let's say, a website and the offering is not written in their own language, that could, I would say, apply that this offer, this person has not been solicited, and which means that this person has come to understand about this project through other means, and they could still use this service, or let's say buy your token, if you're not geo-blocking them or like prohibiting technically from the use of this service, for example. I would say that, again, I'm not a US lawyer and we're not focusing on the US, but recently the UkiDAO case and some others that we have seen coming up from the US, I would say that they are very, very limiting, especially from US persons being involved in DAOs, unfortunately. So whenever you will have a US person that is involved in DAO or even holding a token, I think that would bring to the rules we have today in the US, and they're all only, unfortunately, coming from the SEC, not from the legislative body, like they're not coming from the Congress. They might be, and the whole DAO then might be in danger. Maybe just a comment on the US, when we're talking to some of the projects that are coming from the US and some organizations from there, they say, of course, the SEC is not writing laws. They are doing a lot of enforcement actions. But just because they're so hard to get a political agreement in the Congress at the moment, it's not we're probably not going to have new laws on crypto assets or stable coins, etc., in the US for the next 2 years. This is what I'm hearing. And of course, there's going to be elections. If the situation with the Congress will not change again for the next 4 years, that might take quite a long time. But I'm very much, I would say, impressed by similar organizations like Coin Center, Crypto, the blockchain associations in the US, how active they are in this regard, and how much effort and resources are putting into fighting some of those decisions.
Great, thank you. That was really comprehensive. One last quick thing is the Florian that you mentioned at the beginning. Is that the same Florian from Common Ground?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Well, tell him I said hello.
I will.
Excellent. Well, we've got a few more minutes. We might overrun slightly, Marina. I hope that's okay with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, Marina, you shared your presentation with me. So, are you okay for me to share your presentation with everyone else who is here today?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I shared it. So I'm really happy to share this with you.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So I will share that with all of you in case you didn't miss, or in case you missed some of what we covered today. Just looking at the questions, I believe, MiCA, you got another question. I just want to give Bruno a chance because you've already had a chance. So Bruno, take yourself off mute and come onto the stage.
Yeah. Hello. So this is not directly related to DAOs, but like a while back, there was this whole thing about unhosted wallets, which are like arguably the only real wallets. Yeah, I've not been following it closely, but what's like the latest on that, and like, can we still interact with crypto in Europe while keeping our pseudonymity?
Yeah, so this is a very important question, and I think it's still related to DAOs. What we have right now, I would like to go back to the AML package. So the transfer funds regulation has been finalized, and there is no direct prohibition of unhosted wallets, as we call them, or they have changed it to self-hosted wallets. The only problem is that when you are transacting within different crypto as a service providers, this information will need to be shared. And when the information is coming from an unhosted wallet or self-hosted wallet to crypto as a service provider, the crypto as a service provider will need to KYC your wallet. So in the future, we'll have ways of basically putting your name close to a public address, and this is going to be officially your wallet. There could be, of course, many different consequences coming out of this. One is, of course, security. You will be incentivized to use one wallet because this is going to be the KYC'd one. Not speaking of like public transactions that everyone can check what we and how we transacted on publicly on the blockchain. But this is already finalized, and those rules are final today. But we are now still negotiating and I would say fighting for the AML regulation and the AML directive, where there have been some proposals from the parliament even saying that DAOs should be subject to those rules, and DeFi projects should be subject to those rules, even if they are decentralized, because they have defined decentralization as any sort of action being controlled by a personal, by a legal entity or through a smart contract, which means that nothing can be decentralized at the end of the day. But it was only an amendment within the parliament, so within the parliament version, that was not included in such specific way in the last parliament version. So right now where we are with the AML regulation is that we have all these reversions, and the trilogues are going to start in May. So right now we're writing a position on all the problematic parts of the AML regulation, and then we're going to engage in the next months in those trilogues. Just another thing, maybe what is important is that the peer-to-peer transactions, so if I'm sending some crypto to Etienne, it will not be included in the transfer funds regulation. What we understand peer-to-peer is something that is just from one person to the other, but might not be understood also in the context of DeFi. So that might not be an exclusion of DeFi transactions, but we still don't know. It's just very early, has not been applied yet. So we'll see how also other institutions will interpret this part.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very interesting. MiCA, I seen you. I think you dropped another emoji there for a question. Do you have another one, MiCA?
Yes, maybe just a quick one, and maybe it's a silly one, but not all crypto projects need their own token to function, actually. Let's say if you were to use only Ethereum, does that make the AML and the KYCs easier, or how does that go?
So if the issuance of tokens are regulated by the markets and crypto assets regulation, so if you don't issue this token, you're fine. You don't need to comply with MiCA if you're not a crypto asset service provider. When it comes to the AML, there are rules on how basically we transact crypto assets. So no matter if we issue a token or not, any kind of token, any kind of crypto asset will need to be followed, or the transactions will probably need to be followed by certain information. So, for example, there was again a recent comment by the European Parliament, and I'm taking this into account right now and explaining, because this is really what happened in the last few weeks, and usually the comments from the Parliament are really the most negative ones. So, for example, if I would want to pay somebody in cash, I can do that until, I don't know, 10,000 euros, etc., without anyone being involved. Or there are certain caps depending on the jurisdiction. But there was a specific rules when they would want to have rules that are more stringent for crypto assets. So basically saying, if I would want to pay somebody that came to my house and fixed the door with 1,000, let's say, with Ethereum in one, that would be equivalent to 1,000 euros, I can do that. But then when it comes, when it's going to be more than 1,000 euros, then another service provider will need to be involved in the transaction. So I can do it only through a service provider. What we have observed recently in this regulations, AML specifically, is that they see crypto assets being more riskier than cash. And we do not have the same rules as for cash transactions. And this is a principles that we are fighting against, saying if there are rules that are specific for cash, we would like the crypto assets, basically transactions being regulated in the same way, and will have the same rules for transacting with crypto assets.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, MiCA. Okay. Anyone else got any other questions? Just drop an emoji in the chat so that I know you've got one. Marina, just in the meantime, I've had a couple of other questions offline from members who were not able to make it here today. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a few more questions before we run out of time completely. So the question that I had was about the US having, or the SEC having the Howey test to determine whether something is a security or not. But that, what would be the equivalent in Europe? Who is the governing body that determines whether something is a security or not? And do they have a similar test to the Howey test, or how do they determine that?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So this is where we see the difference between common law and the European law, where we don't have similar tests, but we have laws that define what security is, or we call it financial instruments in Europe. And there is quite an interesting situation that happened right now, because we have a directive, so the MiFID directive, that defines what is a financial instrument, and directives usually are then transported into member states, and they then can be slightly different in every member state, which means that Italy thinks that a financial instrument can be something that maybe Hungary doesn't think it is. And why it is interesting is because MiCA regulates crypto assets, which are not financial instruments. And MiCA doesn't regulate securities or financial instruments. It just says, go back to MiFID and look there what they say a financial instrument is. And what it's not a financial instrument is basically a crypto asset. And this is how it is regulated in MiCA. So right now we have this possible tension between different member states when the exact product might be a financial instrument in one state and might not be, or might be a crypto asset in another one. And this is where the European Securities and Commission comes in, European Securities Agency comes in, and they are going to issue standards and guidance on how to understand the difference between a financial instrument and a crypto asset. And hopefully this will help us understand better. But in the EU, if you want to know what is a financial instrument, you need to go and look in the law that defines those instruments in every specific member state.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that's one question. Let me just see. Paige, did you have another question, Paige? I wasn't sure whether you had something there. No? Okay, well, if you do, take yourself off mute. Let me just have a look at some of the other questions that we've got left. Yeah, okay, so yeah, Marina, another question was, are there any success stories or best practices from DAOs within Europe that the EU Crypto Initiative believes could serve as an example for future regulatory frameworks? So yeah, best practices and success stories. Anything to share like that?
Yes, so I would say that there are a lot of DAOs and DeFi projects that are coming from Europe, but then saying that they're European, I think it really depends on their strategy, if they are incorporated in Europe or there's like, I would say most of the team members coming for Europe, etc. And also our understanding of DAOs from the legal point of view and what is the success story, it's changing a lot. Like, for example, something that is not illegal today might become illegal tomorrow, and we don't know what success story is in the eye of the regulators. So we are just trying to to kind of align the success stories that we understand they are in the ecosystem today with what the regulators also think is a success story. But I would say that we have been, in a way, pretty active in Europe when it comes to DAOs, but also when it comes to understanding blockchain and crypto as a technology to help us improve the society, and also looking and working into, let's say, refi, DeFi, all these goals that mostly, at least the green or the left parties in the European Parliament might be interested in. But what is a problem in Europe is that this idea of crypto is very negative, and whenever we talk to those parties, or we do not even get to talk to them because they think that everyone that is involved in crypto is basically a scammer or is somebody that launders money. I think the narrative is really something that we can improve, and we're working with some collaborators. Even right now, we're just talking to an organization in Brussels, the Regions Unite. They're going to do an event in May, and we're trying to convey this message that DAOs are an incredible, I would say, technology ecosystem way of coordinating people that can help with so many problems that we have today and have never existed before. And we need to understand those to better use in, basically fighting the things that we're all fighting together and agreeing on. But again, the narrative is the one that we need to change.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, I've got a couple more questions. Please bear with me. One was around what are the tax obligations of DAOs in the EU?
Mm-hmm.
Must they comply with the local corporate tax laws just like companies? Now, I know you're not a tax advisor, but are you willing to speak on that at all?
So we had recently a meeting and a seminar at Harvard when we were discussing the model law and specifically on how DAOs should be incorporated and also taxed. And I think that most of the countries, they're really interested in taxation and they want you to pay taxes and they will find a way of how to pay taxes. So this is definitely true for Europe. And even what's happening after that is that we are having a new directive, is the directive on administrative cooperation. And the new version is basically writing rules on how member states should cooperate with each other and communicate in order to better understand what kind of tax issues are happening in different member states. For now, I would say this communication between member states can definitely be improved. Many times it's not optimal. And I think in this part, we were also negotiating with this update of the directive, because they are talking about crypto as a service providers. They're talking about specific service providers that will be subject to those laws. So it's definitely something that is important for Europe. Europe, as you know, had an energy crisis. Europe is also having a very closely a very bad war happening, and it's trying to find ways on how to, I would say, collect more money from taxpayers. And they're definitely also looking into the crypto assets.
Understood. Okay, well, just one final question from someone else, if you don't mind. This was around contributors, specifically, should contributors of a DAO be registered as self-employed contractors, or should or can they be employed by the DAO and sit on payroll like a traditional corporation? So have you seen any evidence that sort of leads to a preference over one or the other?
Yes, so I would say that, again, it depends on DAOs, how they are structured, if they are incorporated, in which way they are incorporated, etc. But looking from the other point of view, Europe has much stricter working laws, like labor laws, than the US. And many times they do have, again, quite strict understanding of what is an employee versus what is a contractor. So I would maybe look into those, and they're again different from any member state. I know that there are companies like WorkDAO. I know that they changed their name. I forgot it again, and some others that are trying to help DAOs in handling this. But again, at the end of the day, it's really the responsibility of the one that is engaging with his contractors of workers to understand what are the rules there.
Right. Okay. Because, and I guess what I'm seeing a lot of is, DAOs attracting contributors and contributors doing work as anonymous people, right? So all they want to do is, I just want to do the work and I want to get paid in crypto on chain. Okay. And that's sort of the transaction that they have with the DAO. But I can see that once you have to register as a contractor or an employee, I mean, you're doxing yourself and the relationship completely changes. And yeah, I was just wondering what the implications of that are. But it's
absolutely. No, that is true. And at the same time, I mean, there's a whole debate on anons working with DAOs, because the other thing is not even like labor law, but also, again, the AML. And how do you show, and who do you show to, how you have earned, specific probably crypto assets for what type of work, in which kind of relationship, what is your legal basis? There's a lot of questions linked to that. How do you pay your own taxes?
Exactly. Okay, fine. Okay, I think that is probably enough for today. That was a lot of information. Does anyone have any other questions before we go? One final question from anyone else? No, it doesn't seem like it. Okay, well, in that case, hang on, someone's typing. It might be another question. This just no. It was just okay. It's just Erin saying it was a great session and thank you. Okay, right, Marina. I think that was it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, it just seems like there is just things we have to wait for, and the policy development is obviously catching up, but crypto is moving at an incredibly fast pace, and for certain things we just have to wait a little bit longer for more clarity. So hopefully we can have you again, maybe I don't know, in a year's time, to tell us a little bit more and give us another update, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that DAOs are really the core to what we have been building in the past years. And there have been a lot of different activities also from the legal and regulatory point of view to basically protect those values and protect the, I would say, ways how DAOs operate. But it is really hard because many times there's not a DAO law that you need to negotiate with regulators for. But there's like all these different laws that can influence DAOs in different ways. And then every time you talk about this specific law, you need to have DAOs in mind. You need to have the decentralized and open source technology in mind in order to protect it from being completely banned or limited. So I hope I have given quite an, I would say, good overview and understandable overview, but feel free to reach out. We are also trying to update the whole community as much as possible through Twitter and our newsletter, and I'm happy to engage with you in the future.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Okay, yes, absolutely. I just had a quick look at at your Twitter account, the European Crypto Initiative Twitter account. You guys are super active, keeping everyone up to date. So really do go and follow them on Twitter. Thanks, Bruno, for dropping the link there. Okay, Marina, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. And to everyone else who joined us today, All the best, and I hope to see you guys next week at our next DAO Club session. Thank you very much, and enjoy your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Marina. Bye.
Bye.